Well, thank you very much indeed, Fergus. I'm really pleased now to have the opportunity to give the perspective of the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee on implementation, and particularly on strengthening public health protection. My aim is to move perhaps from a very metric-driven presentation into some of the more qualitative things, some of the thoughts and important ideas that have been occurring over the year, to give you a feel for what it's like in the real world of decision-making in this very room every month as we seek to deliver the public health protection that the legislation envisages and to use the new tools optimally. So what I would like to do is first of all spend a brief moment or two recapping on how PRAC has been specifically established to be a public health focused body, then to look at the main question you're asking, how are we finding using the new public health protection tools and our perspective, and then a brief look ahead. I can't promise not to echo some of the points that Peter has made so well, but I hope you'll see there from a user angle, there's a slightly different perspective, and I hope it will also show you the joined up working that we have to have. PRAC wouldn't be here every month if it weren't for the tremendous support and coordination and organisation from our EMA colleagues, for which we pay a strong tribute. So just to quickly recap, the public health function of this legislation was clear from the outset, the very first page, pretty much the top whereas, that rules that are necessary for the protection of public health to prevent, detect and assess adverse reactions, as the full safety profile can only be known after medicines have been placed on the market. So that was really our starter for 10. We know what the challenge is, and I don't apologise for repeating this. It's the rule of fives. It's the 5% of all hospital admissions, 5% of all hospital patients experience an ADR, and ADRs are the fifth most common cause of hospital death. This is the Commission, if you like, impact assessment. And can we impact on this with the new legislation? That's the big question, because look at the numbers in terms of lives and in terms of resource. That's where we need to show an impact of the new legislation over time. The legislative aims have often been crystallised for you, flowing from the deficiencies that were found by the Commission. But today, for PRAC, we are looking at these central aims: proactivity and proportionate safety monitoring, robust and timely decision-making leading to consistent action across the member states on safety issues, greater inclusiveness for patients and healthcare professionals in the whole system, it should be for us, by us, with us, and high levels of transparency. So, in establishing this new public health-facing committee, we had to bring people together. It is the sum of the parts of all the people. At the inaugural meeting here in Brussels in July 2012, we all got together, and one would have hoped for a consensus on our rules of procedure, but already people were showing that they had critical minds, and it was a majority decision, with some members really keen that the experts should be able to take referrals, and that's going to be proven to be a pretty wise position to have taken. Just to reorientate you on the membership and to highlight here how important our 6 members appointed by the European Commission are, with relevant expertise in clinical pharmacology, pharmacoepidemiology as specified, but other really critically important areas in biologics, in risk communication and so forth. So we have this extra power to our team in terms of these, some internationally renowned experts in their fields. Also to highlight the importance of the member and alternate representing the patient organisations and the member and alternate representing healthcare professionals. And it was a matter of some regret, I have to say, that the appointment of these vitally important members took until, well, done at Brussels on the 28th of February, we had our health professionals, Philippe Babylon and Kirsten Meir, and our patient representatives, Albert van der Zijden and Marco Greco. And clearly with the way that diaries work, you can understand how probably they've come to about 3 meetings so far. So it's early days, but what I can say is that they are more than contributing, and contributing right across the piece. This isn't just a contribution on a niche around does risk minimisation work in healthcare systems? Does the product information deliver what's necessary for patients? It's a broad contribution to decision making and extremely important. A quick reminder of the mandate of the committee, a very detailed and specified mandate, a very broad mandate, all the aspects of risk management of the use of medicines, including detection, assessment, minimisation and communication relating to risk. But the point to emphasise is that this is having due regard to therapeutic effect. So we may not be as efficacy focused as CHMP, but the therapeutic role of the medicine is at the forefront of all the discussions, as it should be. So, using these new tools, and what is our perspective? And I think it will be clearest if I perhaps divide them into the three public health pillars: proactivity of our safety monitoring and our planning, prompt responses and benefit risk action, and the third pillar, transparency and communication, and bringing that as close as possible to real time. So let me start with the proactivity of PRAC. A lot of P's today, proactivity and planning. And there has been a major PRAC focus on signal detection. I guess you've heard from Peter how significant a step EMA sees this, but really I think it's probably the jewel in the crown. We are now as close to real time as may be, with those adverse drug reactions flowing into Eudravigilance. I think it's about 40,000, 50,000 every month is delivering signals and giving us the tools to improve product information and to improve public health protection. So we have set up a signal management review team known as SMART, with the base being in the implementing regulation, Article 23, that the committee shall regularly review the methodologies and publish recommendations as appropriate. It has three work streams: tools and processes, methodological guidance, and signal detection methods. And I'd like at this point to pay a bit of public tribute to Sabine Strauss, to Xavier Kurtz, very much a joint effort to deliver these methodologies. Vitally important that we get it right. And when the publication comes out that you've just heard about, more detailed on Q's and A's and so forth, you will get some of the detail and the insight that you need to know about how this work is progressing. But SMART it is, SMART it's called, and SMART it is. The sum total of the year is 92. Now you might say, not a lot for the volume of reporting, particularly in the light of those additional reports. Here in the UK, we've had a 25% increase in ADR reports following the new legislation, vastly more on the patient reporting side. So 92. But having said that, we have almost half being labelling changes. That's really important. In fact, it's slightly over half, isn't it? And indeed, we're getting, though many are having assessment ongoing, a rather small proportion result in referrals. So this is telling you that this wealth of information is being translated largely, quite promptly, into new information to inform clinical practice and all those who are using medicines. Peter has already shown you the month-on-month bar charts that we keep track of. This is in this slide only up till June, I'm afraid. But I hope you can see in the blue parts of the bars that getting more information is, generally speaking, the first step, so that we're working with marketing authorization holders to get that cumulative data and that picture that the MAH is uniquely positioned to help with. And then in some instances, there's a more mature picture that will result in a variation. So outcomes there are, and they're coming in real time every month. I'd like to give you a flavour of all of those outcomes, but sadly it's a bit more than even one slide will have. But I just wanted to show some of the areas, the clinical links that have been shown, that knowledge of which will inform the user in preparedness, in management, and so on. So this is a really positive step. I think people often see signals as a sort of negative thing. Actually, picking up these associations, validating them, researching them, investigating them, quantifying them, and communicating them really improves clinical practice and the safety of medicines. And I think this is, as I've said, a jewel in the crown of what the new legislation has achieved. And PRAC is really pleased to be giving it the attention it deserves. We've heard about the additional monitoring scheme, and I just want to highlight some aspects of this. Very pleased to have the question from a colleague here saying some of this language needs tailoring to patients, because the key point is that it was the patient organisations and the healthcare professional organisations who got us to where we are. PRAC had a duty in law to select a symbol, and clearly everyone had perspectives on magnifying glasses and on abstract symbols and so forth. But it was the voice of patient organisations, and I think someone who's in this room at the moment knows that, Ilaria knows that, who actually helped to guide the principles that were then reported to the European Commission, that underpinned a selection, and now here we are moving forward, the list having been published from April onwards. So I think that tells you that it has to be a system that speaks to people, and if our wording in the information, in the promotion that's going out next week, needs adapting locally, then that's exactly what should follow on, and thank you for raising that point. At the PRAC, we look at proposals for the list every month. It's now routine, and this is something, as I say, is a high priority for us, and we often debate around suitability when a member state brings forward a proposal. Watch out for the communications campaign, and please do give feedback, and I hope there'll be mechanisms around the member states to gather that feedback. In terms of proactivity, we've heard about risk management plans a lot, but within those, the PRAC has been looking very carefully at the PASS protocols, not least to see whether they're non-interventional or clinical trials possibly. And you can see how that workload is growing, and it is a key part where we like to see that our experts are having a full and really detailed input into the design and methodologies employed so that we get the best possible results. We know these are major investments for those that have to implement and conduct them. We want to see the best possible results from this, and the value added of PRAC into, as I say, design and methodology is really important for the committee, and it is a high priority and a growing priority. Perhaps I can give you one early example. It might be one that colleagues are interested to think about. Ivacaftor, a gene therapy for a proportion of patients with cystic fibrosis, children who've had little therapeutic option. And now to look at how long-term data collection can actually include, dare I say it, aspects related to efficacy in minimising complications, exacerbations and so forth, as well as the safety data that here we have the CHMP requirement for what should be done. So you can see how each protocol needs dedicated and expert input to be sure that it delivers the very best information to aid the safety monitoring in clinical practice. Now to the second public health pillar, promptness of benefit risk recommendations. And I think we've already had highlighted the enormous importance of having binding outcomes on referrals. We don't look back, we look forward, but the old working party did work, which was never fully implemented in the member states. And this is a major step forward for public health, that when a decision is reached, the outcome will be binding in the member states. The second importance is the rigorous adherence to timeframes, and I don't know if our EMA colleagues have got day-by-day watches, but we have to stick to there is absolutely no deviation from the timeframes in order to deliver what's published, and as I say, no deviation from those commitments. And then the PSUR as a benefit risk decision-making tool coming into its own, and particularly as we look forward to the single assessment, ultimately taking a lot of the workload, particularly in relation to older medicines. So a word or two about these three areas. And first, let's look at referrals. Well, as you know, our Swiss Army knife for referrals, shouldn't really be Swiss, should it? It should be a European Army knife, has a number of different blades. And just like the present that you might have been given, it takes a while to work out which blade, which tool is appropriate to which job. I think it's the best analogy I can give. It has been a real learning experience for the committee, and a time of change from the old, perhaps more comfortable scenarios like Article 31 is to how to best use Article 107. So, as I say, an important area for gathering experience and learning. You've already seen how time is falling out, and I reiterate that this third of the work time being devoted to referrals is something we're really quite concerned about. It may be seen as being, for the issues, yes, justified, but for the use of people coming in from all over the EU, a third of the time on referrals is virtually, I think, unsustainable. So we have to look at how well we're using these tools in order to be more proportionate with the time and resource allocation. As you can see, it rather drowns out around a fifth of the time on risk management plans, a sixth on PSURs, 10% on signals, 4% each on pass and renewals. And I would very much like to see this breakdown change very significantly going forward to where we can really be adding value across a broader range of products and broader populations of patients. So let's talk a little bit about Article 107I. A committee colleague in the UK asked me if it was turbocharged, like some of the car designations, and I think it should be turbocharged. In some ways, it is a turbocharged referral for urgent decisions. So a very tight timetable in place, no appeals, and the data triggers have been really quite wide. If you consider some of the triggers for these first few Article 107s, from myopathy, infection, venous thromboembolism, serious skin reactions, liver toxicity. So what is pharmacovigilance data? A very broad capture there. Perhaps I can illustrate this with an example just from this month. You may have seen on the report, the highlights, the Numeta 13%, the parenteral nutrition for preterm babies, going from a signal of reports of hypermagnesemia in July through a voluntary recall to a suspension this month. That really is, I could say, turbocharged. That is relying on rapporteurs and company working closely together to give the best possible insight. And it's not just the suspension of the formulation for the preterm infants, it's well thought through risk minimisation tools for the formulation, the 16% for the toddlers, for the neonates to 2 years. So I think in terms of optimal use of tools, this has got to be, we are getting there to be able to deliver this in 2 months, as I say, with strong collaborative working with the industry. Perhaps it's a little surprising that the majority of the work has been in the area of Article 31. Is there a comfort factor here? I guess a lot of colleagues think that they have a chance to get further into benefit and risk and do a more in-depth review, capture a larger volume of data that will be capable of impact on the outcome. And the first 5 of these, obviously in Peter's slide, have been completed. I think what we need to say is with the older medicines, we're very often up against difficulties getting all the data together, or data that may not exist to current day standards. So this is challenging territory, and possibly as we go forward, once we get the single PSUR and so forth, that may take some of the weight out of this. Some of these referrals have been, if you like, translated over from the old system, such as the short-acting beta agonists in obstetric use, which was just delivered this month. The other thing with the red stamp shows you that some of these actives are available without medical prescription in some of the member states. And that has been the subject of quite considerable thought at the level of PRAC, because, as we know, the degrees of supervision and the attitudes in member states to self-medication can be quite different. And so a working decision in principle that OTC status should be considered at member state level has been where we have got to. It's not to say we wouldn't rule out a look at legal status as a risk minimisation tool, but the key decision here being to look at member state level, and that was the decision with diclofenac. The other thing you might notice here with the hydroxyethyl starch is in this area, re-examinations are coming in, and I think probably in debate we'll discuss a little more about how that impacts the 15 days to request a re-examination on the overall timetables for delivery. So it gets quite complex. I think in terms of procedures that are still underway, I think you can begin to see the extent of complexity with the combined hormonal contraceptives and the risk of venous thromboembolism. We have 9 different progestogens in that review, enormous amount of data to look at. With Raine and angiotensin system, well, perhaps I'll come on to that. It is, if you like, the epitome of a complex referral, but a fairly straightforward question about dual blockade of the renin-angiotensin system. So let's think again about what that's telling us. Other people are thinking about it and debating it. It was interesting to see in the British Medical Journal is an EMA review on hormonal contraception and thrombosis needed. So other people are asking these questions. Now, when we're doing them at PRAC, our focus is on delivering the very best. You may have seen, if you're in the UK recently, a story about a young woman with a thrombosis. This is a very rare risk. It's a risk we know about. But reading into the story, put to bed by her parents for several days, thinking she'll get better. Now, that's telling us something about the way risk is communicated and the way health professionals understand and are ready to diagnose and manage. So please don't take this as me saying we have a safety issue here. We have something that we need to understand in the context of delivery of information, and the debate hasn't finished yet. There's a wider debate about how much regulation should do in this area and what is down to clinical practice, medical training, and so forth. But the genie's out of the bottle, the debate is being had. We need to think very carefully about how we're using these precious resources at the PRAC. I've mentioned the referral on the renin-angiotensin system agents and double blockade, or dual blockade as it's called. I think those in the field will know that European guidance is that there is minimal, if any, additional benefit from dual blockade. There may be harm. So to go through a referral when something's in European clinical guidance for 24 substances, 37 centrally authorised products, over 16,000 nationally authorised products, 9 rapporteurs, because it's a work-sharing exercise, and an unknown number of companies for the deliverable, which may well head to, can't predict, but it may well head to be very consistent with guidance. This is simply regulation catching up with guidance. So again, our future tools may not need the heavy armoury of a referral to deliver this. And I do hope this is something that we can possibly pick up in discussion. I will now turn to say a word or two about periodic safety update reports. Whether you're cup half full or cup half empty, we've heard that 16% so far are resulting in new labelling. The good news is it's decision time. So when we look at a PSUR, it's time to actually look at what action needs to be taken in the light of what the company is proposing. You could say, if it's just 16%, that spending a lot of committee time on this could be an area for streamlining, and so it is. With help from EMA colleagues, there's a much more streamlined approach here, but indeed we always have to be ready, as we were with strontium ranelate, to actually focus down in and say it's time to take a safety action, and it's time then to look more in depth, perhaps by a referral. So it's a really important area. We've got new approaches to deliver what is risk proportionate in the area of PSURs. So it's something I think we all need to be very alert to and to work together on. So now to the third pillar, and I'm racing ahead. I hope everyone here logs on every month. This is this month's highlights, and I think we can be quite pleased and proud to say here in September we're looking at the highlights of a meeting that took place in this room. Slightly old news now, it's been out for 3 weeks. And we can pay tribute to all those who work really hard to make sure that it's available in accessible terms, in carefully thought through succinct explanation, so that all those out there know we're on the case and that they know everything that we know. So I hope it's on your to-do list every Friday of the PRAC week to check what's the news. I'd also like to talk about stakeholder involvement via another route, which is the submissions that stakeholders are invited to make in the context of 107I referrals. With the first few, tetrazepam, dian, flupatine, Numita, we may have felt that this was not going to be helping us a very great deal. Hydroxyethyl starch, a much richer contribution. So maybe this is something again for discussion. It's part of our system, it's part of our way of working. How can we make this more helpful? Is it a case of awareness? Is it a case of the questions that are put for comment? How can we make this a more helpful exercise rather than simply bumping along with 1, 2, 3 contributions, which can't in any way give us a new dimension to our work. Perhaps hydroxyethyl starch was something that finally touched people, but as I say, more work is needed. So I want to spend some time looking ahead, because PRAC is very much looking ahead at what is to come. And in a sense, I'd like to be able to say all the members of the committee have given me their priorities. I can't say that just yet. We do have time at our informal meetings to think again about priorities, but this is my shortlist, if you like, which is still more work on increasing stakeholder involvement in the system. This is why we're here, and if we can't engage optimally, then we won't be doing our very best. Strengthening the science base for benefit-risk decision-making, optimising the use of the tools, and I've already reflected some of the pros and cons that have occurred to the committee, and finally, the real crunch question: how can we measure the impact of all this effort? Has it actually delivered for public health? Clearly, we've heard that one of the important next steps is public hearings. It is going to be the subject of a lot more work and debate, because not just clarifying when and how, but first, do we agree on when it's appropriate? We have to, as I say, get the value out of an endeavour like this, not to raise expectations, but to make sure everyone knows what their contribution can be and what may be done with that contribution to impact on the outcome. So a busy slide here, but I think getting the objectives right, yes, it's about transparency, yes, it's about empowerment, but I think the value added is what we've got to measure. It isn't just a token, it should be adding value, building a more rounded outcome that is fully reflective of the contributions. On strengthening the science base, the committee is extremely pleased at how much the EMA is doing to actually engage on this. Science, medicines, health, and let's get the science where it should be, right at the top of the priorities. For example, with the combined hormonal contraceptive referral, we've had a really helpful piece of work on the utilisation of combined hormonal contraceptives in the EU. This gives a really valuable current evidence to help inform decision making. We also have the European Network of Centres for Pharmacovigilance and Pharmacoepidemiology, and I think we can do more to build the links between PRAC and NCEP, an infrastructure to help research in areas where, for whatever reason, the data are less than we would like them to be. So more to be done to strengthen the science base. And we've heard a bit about the further legislation, the action that's being taken at the moment to have an expert group on what types of studies, methodologies might be used for post-authorization efficacy studies. Very important work, and some of the member state experts are closely involved in this, and I'm sure the Commission is listening hard. Optimising the use of the new tools. I've already spoken about thinking harder about the scope of referrals. Can they be more targeted? And importantly, the criteria for triggering these. It has been open for business up to now, an open door. Is that right? I think we need to think about the resources, that anyone who says, I'd like a referral on this, has an open door. I'm possibly being a little provocative, but it is something that is being debated, and I think we need to consider the pros and cons of it. Signal roles, responsibilities and methodologies are a really vital area for optimising use of the tools, and I'm sure the publication shortly of the package of Qs and As, all the signals of the last year, will actually stimulate a lot more debate. It's, again, opening up more into how the work is being done here. And thirdly, in terms of optimising the tools, this is perhaps less for PRAC than for all of us, is the European Commission joint action. This is ensuring that all the countries are fully geared up to operationalise the tools. And as you can see, the committee won't deliver optimally unless all parts of the network are also delivering optimally. So I'll give you a very brief update on the joint action. The joint action is a commission, part of a commission programme of work. A call for proposals was put out and a successful bid was put together. I'm delighted to say that all member states, I think bar one, are involved. And clearly resource disparities around the EU would have made it quite ambitious for everyone to be involved. It now has the acronym SCOPE, Strengthening Collaborations to Operate Pharmacovigilance in Europe. And its objective is to facilitate that collaboration when everyone trusts their colleagues and doesn't need to duplicate work. So we have to get to this situation, an effective network, effectively operating the new tools to the same standards and practices. To use the Olympic analogy yet again, I mean, the bronze medal goes for those who implement, the silver medal goes to those who can comply, but the gold is operation. And I think that's what we're trying to lift up, raise our game to, effective operation. And this is why the dialogue that we're going to be having all together today is so important, to recognise that fact. It can no longer be a system where a small number of member states really are able to operate and others are having to choose and be a bit more selective in how they work. It has to be for all of us. So what will the governance look like? Clearly the European Commission at strategic level. I want to emphasise that the next level, the executive level, is very eclectic. It will have not just, I say, Commission, EMA, independent expert advisors, but patient and health professional organisations. So that is all going to be really important in the governance. Then there will be 3 horizontal work packages led by UK and Portugal, and 5 of the vertical led by Croatia, Netherlands, Spain, Hungary and Italy. And this is really going to be the workhorse that delivers standards of operation across the network. It was going to get a retroactive start for next Monday, actually, but with the usual slippage of, I think, shuffling papers and this and that, it will be November. But it will still have a 2013 date on it, and that is really important. I guess some of you may have questions about how this reads across to the governance structure that Peter highlighted around completing the implementation job. But the key to understanding it is this is about operate in all the members of the network. Let's also not forget the current call under the Innovative Medicines Initiative for proposals around leveraging emerging technology for pharmacovigilance. We have got to have the best modern tools. It goes without saying. And this has been a little while in coming, but a very exciting call, going not just on the input side of using technology, but on the output side, looking at vulnerable populations, including paediatrics. So at the moment, there's the usual formation and dissolution of consortia, but regardless of how the bid is eventually agreed or not by the Commission, I think we can be assured that EMA will be playing a very strong and formative role in this. So watch out for WebAE, a really important call. Looking further ahead, we've talked about the ability to demonstrate public health protection. Risk management plans have elements of assessing the effectiveness of risk minimisation. I think PRAC has yet to operationalise regular review of this. I think the public would expect no less. We should be consistently looking at how well risk minimisation is working in practice, and I won't give examples of that. Clearly, areas around isotretinoin, pregnancy prevention plans and so forth come immediately to mind, but there may be others too. Perhaps more subtly when we've asked for perhaps renal function to be monitored. Is it being monitored? And so on and so forth. So that is our real task to look at in terms of assessing how well we're protecting public health. So I think what I've tried to race through rather quickly is that the establishment of PRAC and its operationalisation here in this room every month has been central to delivering the new legislation by using the tools, the public health tools that are now given to us. We know that we can use these for robust decision making, and we can use them to rigorous timescales. But I think we have to start now reflecting on the judicious, wise use of those tools to maximise the benefit where it's achievable. There's been major strides forward in transparency and stakeholder involvement, but we need to keep going and go further beyond the patient organisations to the patients out there, consumers, members of the public. When I was asked what I could summarise in one sentence, as you can see, I was using words like proactivity, inclusiveness, strides forward in transparency. But the real issue here is that we must look forward to progress in the year to come. That's where our focus has to be. If we're talking school reports, I wasn't sure we'd be doing that, I think we have 3 R's for our infant committee. Rigorous science is number 1. Risk proportionate decision making will be a key to actually devoting our resources to where they will be most impactful. And everything must be relevant to public health. There isn't the resource in the system for the fine tweaks. We must have relevance to public health as our touchstone. So I hope I've rather quickly given you a perspective from PRAC, and I'd be delighted to take questions. Thank you.
So thank you very much, June, and that was a really excellent overview of the PRAC and all the really putting flesh on the bone of the regulation, turning that into practical action. And your 3 R's, I think, are excellent guiding principles for how we should focus that activity. Please, questions or observations? Okay, first gentleman.
Laurent Auclair from Sanofi. Thank you so much, June, for this presentation. I think it's very important to see really clinical science and patient care coming now out from procedures, regulations, and I think that you have shown that very, very importantly. I want to stress that on the industry side, we've been hurt by a few experiences, particularly in the use of referrals, for which I think it would be very good to take the lessons learned and maybe also have industry contributing on that. And particularly when you speak about relevance for public health, and you have also your toolbox of referrals, it would be very good that the criteria for triggering a referral are really made more transparent for all stakeholders. We've seen what is called an urgent union procedure launched for a product that has been on the market for 15 years for an issue yet severe, but that was there for more than 10 years, and suddenly with no other ways for these old products taking a defense and thinking about the use of that product and what would be the withdrawal of that product taken into consideration. So, and asking for redeveloping a product which is very old, this type of thing, I think I just want to stress that we need to have really more clarity, and I am pleased to see that you announce that it will happen, but that also the industry perspective is taken into account in that discussion.
Well, thank you very much for your comments, Laurent. I'm sure you understand that the previous scenario where there wasn't full implementation of outcomes in member states has led to a drive for that. However, in doing that and ensuring that all the activities are legally based, the pendulum has swung perhaps too far in one direction, and there are other ways to achieve outcomes. If you read the monthly report from September, I'm sure you have, you'll see that one referral was withdrawn. And it may sound quite astonishing to those colleagues who perhaps aren't involved in all of this, that a voluntary action should supersede legal power. If all are seeking the same outcome, to use a judicial, legally based process is unnecessary. So that is, I think, a turning point. Your question is, how can you engage in this discussion? And I'm sure after this meeting, we'll be talking about how that might happen. It's a complex discussion because it will involve legal views too. But the justification of a referral, these are precious resources and they have to be justified. So thank you for raising that.
Hubertus Krantz, ASGP. Thank you very much, June, for this excellent overview on where we stand with regard to the implementation process. One point I think many have a particular interest is how the future will be, or the potential future will be, of the public hearings. And I think you made a very good point, which I can only endorse, which is that if you do a public hearing, it really should have an added value. And to take this as a guiding principle, I think is an excellent basis. I understand that this point has been also discussed in other fora here in the EMEA, if I'm correct, Informed Management Board. I think also even the HMA looked at this. Is there any process already foreseen how to define further the criteria when or under which condition a public hearing should take place?
I don't want to speak for EMA colleagues, and thank you for questioning how this will move forward. I hope I've really made clear that nothing is imminent because of the consideration that's currently ongoing about the criteria, the conduct, the procedures. There's a lot to be thought through. And before anything would be decided, there will be consultation. So I don't know if perhaps Peter might like to speak to this, because we are contributors at the PRAC, but we don't, if you like, have the decision on how and when a consultation would happen. Perhaps even Fergus can help.
Well, I think, Peter, you already referred, or are the colleagues still here? I can't see.
I don't know if Juan Garcia might like to give a response.
Yeah, maybe. Thank you very much. Just to complement what June said, I think we are working on criteria, on a procedure, but just to confirm that before anything is implemented and before anything is finalized, it will be sent out for public consultation so that you can have your say on the process.
But I think if we can take this a little further, there was a very helpful workshop yesterday on the patient voice, albeit in decision-making on benefit risk, which involved the Patient and Consumer Working Party and the Healthcare Professional Working Party. But I think we're beginning to see concrete areas, as exemplified in the scientific advisory groups, where there are particular aspects, acceptability of risk, what the value of the medicine is, how feasible risk minimisation tools are. These are all things that have to be worked through from the patient perspective. And once we can capture that, we're better able to say in what circumstances would those issues be really relevant to impact on judgments.
Nick Sykes from Pfizer. June, as I'm sure you're aware, the research-based industry over the last few months has been pulling together their experiences of working with PRAC. And from my review of those experiences, I think one of the most overriding conclusions to come out of this, and one of the things that industry really needs to, is really calling for from PRAC, is better or earlier communication that PRAC is actually working or looking at the products that we have on the market. I mean, there's been very many experiences where, within our own companies, we've just been blindsided by the fact that, we've got this request from PRAC, we've got 4 or 5 days to make a response. Well, 4 or 5 days is perhaps a bit over the top, but very short period to make a response. We had no idea that PRAC was even looking at this. Is there anything within your work plan to actually try to improve the way that PRAC can let companies know that their products are under review?
Well, thank you for raising this, and it's a really important point, not just from the principle of no surprises, but actually from the principle of PRAC having the best input. So that would be the real gain. Clearly, because of the challenge of moving to areas where there will be combinations of centrally authorised medicines and nationally authorised medicines, the fact that we haven't been able to, if you like, look for a marketing authorisation holder, one brand leader for everything, has rather held things up. And I think what you're saying is that the best has been the enemy of the good. In other words, being able to help with some companies has been held up because of not being able to do it for all. But you can see how the developments have been going, say, with the Article 57 database. And I think probably we need to get a more, if you like, stepwise approach to this. I do know that EMA colleagues have been giving it very considerable thought. Partly it's around all the work that's done before the meeting to publish that agenda, but there needs to be aspects that relate to communication by those affected. I don't think anybody's saying no, it's just how. I don't know if Peter wants to say anything.
Maybe just briefly, to fully acknowledge the issue, put it on record, as it were, that for a marketing authorization holder to find out for the first time about a signal, for example, a new safety issue in the publication of an agenda, when they have a responsibility to their product and the safety of their product, to be the stewards of their product, is far from ideal, far from ideal. Looking forward, and it was actually in my slide presentation, looking forward, clearly the answer is Article 57. We have, as June intonated, we have been reticent about informing people via the Article 57 database because we don't think everybody has fully complied and we don't have all the entries there. But again, as June mentioned, it could be that the enemy of the good, perfect is the enemy of the good, because those that have submitted their product information into Article 57, we can contact them quite easily. So I think that's the direction of travel. We'll need to think through the operational and legal aspects of partially informing, which is the reality of the next 12 months probably. But I think we're very sympathetic that we need to find a solution to this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I hope that we'll be able to progress that, because I think there are different steps we can take, and obviously with different kinds of procedure, there are different time frames and methodologies we can use. But again, with the publication of the Q&A on the signal detections and progressing the way we're managing that will be one aspect that we can deal with. And as I said, I think people who have entered their information in Article 57 hopefully can find the way to ensure that they get the proper benefit from that over time in receiving information.